Here's a longer, more engaging version of the Chernobyl disaster story, with added dramatic narration and fascinating information. In the early morning hours of April 26, 1986, while most of the city of Pripyat was still sleeping peacefully, an explosion shook the night sky over northern Ukraine. It was no ordinary industrial accident, it was the beginning of the worst nuclear disaster in human history. Reactor No. 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant exploded during a safety test that was not carried according to standard procedures. Within seconds, the roof of the reactor lifted off, graphite burst into flames, and the night sky was filled with a blinding greenish glow, a sign of deadly ionizing radiation in the air. What was supposed to be an emergency simulation turned into an uncontrolled nightmare. Massive amounts of radiation, tens of times more than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, spilled into the atmosphere. Thousands of tons of radioactive material were carried by the winds across Europe. Ironically, the residents of Pripyat were given no warning. Children went to school, families strolled through the parks, unaware that they were bathing in invisible waves of radiation. It was 36 hours after the explosion that the Soviet government ordered a mass evacuation. The residents of Pripyat were given just a few hours to leave their homes, with the promise that they would return in 3 days. But the reality was different, they never returned. The city remains a ghost town to this day, frozen in time, abandoned with children's toys, clothes on the line, and scattered schoolbooks. Here, history has left a permanent scar on humanity. The Soviet government initially tried to cover up the disaster. But when radiation levels rose dramatically in Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, the world began to question what was happening. International pressure forced the Soviets to admit that a major nuclear disaster had occurred. Thousands of workers, known as liquidators, were deployed to extinguish the fires, build giant concrete enclosures, and clean up radioactive material. They were unsung heroes who sacrificed their health and even their lives to prevent a greater disaster. The impact was enormous. The forests around the site became red forest because the leaves were scorched by radiation. Animals and plants experienced genetic mutations. Hundreds of thousands of people were exposed, thousands more died or suffered from cancer due to radiation. Children born a few years later suffered from birth defects. To this day, the exact number of victims of this tragedy is still debated by scientists and humanitarian organizations. However, from this great tragedy, the world learned. Chernobyl became a turning point in global awareness of the risks of nuclear energy. It inspired the establishment of stricter international safety standards and transparency in disaster management. The place is now a radioactive exclusion zone covering thousands of square kilometers, but it is also an attraction for researchers, photographers, and tourists who want to see the remains of the destruction of modern civilization. Chernobyl is not only a story of destruction, but also a warning. A reminder that technology, no matter how great, can backfire deadly if not maintained with responsibility and moral awareness. The explosion has long been extinguished, but the echoes of its tragedy still echo today.